So, hello everyone. You're very welcome back to our third session of the day, Colonial Legacies. My name is Emma Murphy. I'm Curator of Terrestrial Zoology at the National Museum of Ireland Natural History in Dublin. And I'm really looking forward to chairing this session and seeing the fantastic talks that we have coming up. The first one of this session is the colonial legacies of natural history collections, specimens from the Caribbean as a case study by Patricia Torres-Pineda from the Museo de Historia Natural Eugenio de Jesús Marcano and University of Michigan Museum of Zoology. It's a pre-recorded talk, so we're going to play a video and then we're going to have 5 minutes questions after that.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Patricia Torres-Pineda. I am a curator in the zoology department at the Museo Nacional de Historia Natural of Santo Domingo in the Dominican Republic, and I'm currently in the U.S., specifically at the University of Michigan, pursuing a doctoral degree in ecology and evolutionary biology, and also a professional certificate in museum studies. As a biologist and a naturalist, natural history collections are fundamental for my research. They serve as invaluable repositories of biodiversity knowledge from the past, the present, and the future. In the past decades, there has been a surge in conversations, debate, and focused efforts on decolonization, democratization, transparency, and access to biodiversity and scientific knowledge in general. Much of these efforts are taking place in exhibitions and interpretation facing the public. But in comparison, not as many initiatives are initiating conversations on the decolonization of natural history collecting practices and natural history specimen-based research. Recently, in 2023, a new study accounting for natural history collections around the world estimated that over 1.1 billion specimens are currently stored in these collections. Nevertheless, 50%, over 563 million of these specimens, are housed in just 10 institutions around the world, all of them located in the global north. And this is particularly telling and paints a contrasting picture when we take into account that most of the biological richness of the world is concentrated in tropical regions of the global south. This inverse relationship of where biodiversity occurs versus where it is housed and stored became evident in herbarium collections thanks to a study by Park and others in 2023. It is not a coincidence that most of these biodiversity-rich nations of the global south have also been subjected to colonization. I am particularly interested in exploring the biased overrepresentation of natural history specimens in global north institutions, mainly from the perspective of Caribbean biodiversity, and understanding the contemporary implications of these uneven relationships. The Caribbean is particularly relevant in these conversations given its historical context as the birthplace of European colonialism in the Americas. The Caribbean region is comprised of 33 political entities, including sovereign states, dependencies, and overseas territories. Even to this day, the socio-political reality of the Caribbean is complex. The Caribbean has been deemed as a natural laboratory since colonial times. The Caribbean's 7,000 islands exhibit a disproportionately large array of heterogeneity in paleogeography, microclimates, and biomes. Through evolutionary time, these features have promoted the diversification of flora and fauna unique of this region. The Caribbean is one of the 36 biodiversity hotspots of the world. These are areas characterized for its high levels of endemism, and they also present high levels of threat to conservation. Of the over 2,000 vertebrate animal species occurring in the Caribbean islands, over 900 of them are endemic. Most of them are restricted to a single island. For this work, I am particularly interested in understanding where specimens of endemic species occurring in the Caribbean islands are stored, in order to understand how the colonial legacies of extraction, mobilization, and exploitation of natural resources native knowledge and biological specimens still shape and inform the practices of collecting and doing natural history research even to this day. According to Miriti and others, the colonial endeavors of the European and American colonial expansion during the 16th and 19th century provided almost all the infrastructure needed for traveling and learning about these distant places as naturalists traveled with the hundreds of state-sponsored colonial voyages of discovery. Even though there has been progress, these conversations are still not as prevalent in the field of natural history collections in the Caribbean. The objective of this presentation is not at all to provide a comprehensive study on all the different and complex relationships of natural history collections with colonialism in the Caribbean, but to explore the geopolitical distribution of zoological specimens from the Caribbean in collections around the world, but also to start conversations on how disparities in museum collections lead to asymmetric and biased relationships between researchers and collecting efforts, as well as how these patterns still influence modern biodiversity studies. In order to do this, I compiled a list with the names of endemic species of birds, amphibians, reptiles, and fishes occurring in the Caribbean islands. I accessed biodiversity data available in the Global Biodiversity Information Facility for these species, making sure that these were preserved specimens and tabulating where are these species from versus in which collection they are stored. Data was available for 907 species for a total of over 130,000 records occurring in 85 institutions. I calculated the ratio of the number of stored species per country. This is the number of species that have specimens housed in collections in a given country over the total species richness. According to this data, over 80% of species of birds, fish, and reptiles and amphibians endemic of the Caribbean islands are housed in American institutions. The representation of Caribbean biodiversity in local natural history collections is highest in Cuba and in the Dominican Republic, where about 20% of the region's biodiversity is housed. This is expected as these countries are among the most species-rich in the Caribbean. However, there remains a significant gap in the representation of regional species within local collections. While these figures highlight an apparent asymmetry, especially when compared to the much larger collections in the United States, raw numbers alone do not capture the full picture. The available data are inherently biased toward large institutions in the global north, which have greater resources and established traditions for digitizing and sharing biodiversity records through platforms like GBIF. In contrast, most Caribbean collections have limited or no data available on such platforms, making regional biodiversity appear underrepresented. This pattern also reveals a broader issue: the lack of regional networks among Caribbean natural history institutions. Currently, each country tends to focus on documenting its own natural heritage, often in isolation. Strengthening collaboration and data sharing across the region would be essential to better represent and conserve Caribbean biodiversity. Another recurrent and relevant topic is one concerned with the representation of primary type specimens in our regional collections, being holotypes and paratypes arguably among the most important type specimens. A holotype is the single permanent reference specimen upon which a new species is formally described and named. Paratypes are additional specimens collected alongside the holotype, illustrating variation within the species. Both holotypes and paratypes are foundational to taxonomy and comparative biology, serving as authoritative standards for species identification and classification. As a case study close to home, we can see that despite the Dominican Republic's extraordinary biodiversity and high levels of endemism, especially among fish, amphibians, and reptiles, the representation of primary type specimens stored in local collections is strikingly low. For example, for fishes, for which at least 25 species are endemic to the Hispaniola, yet only one paratype is held locally. For amphibians and reptiles, more than 200 species are endemic. Only 6 paratypes and 2 holotypes are present in the Dominican Republic. This severe underrepresentation of primary type material highlights a critical gap in the country's scientific infrastructure, but it also underscores the need for more equitable relations between local and international researchers. The overt mobilization of specimens and the knowledge associated with them from the Caribbean to larger, more powerful and richer institutions and countries is still distilled to this day, many times in the form of power imbalances that commonly arise when collaborating with international researchers, which many times take with them the specimens, leaving few or none material left in local collections. Such disparities hinder local research capacity and perpetuate dependency on foreign repositories. Local Caribbean researchers commonly have to visit the natural history collections in the global north in order to access the comparative material needed for study the endemic and native biodiversity of their islands. Limited local collections hinders the ability of Caribbean researchers to study, track, and respond to the biodiversity challenges of the region. In order to better understand and respond to the colonial legacies of natural history collections in the Caribbean, we should study in depth the temporal and geopolitical patterns of collecting in the Caribbean. We should open a dialogue that moves us toward a more inclusive and equitable practices in zoological specimen collecting and curating practices. International researchers should establish long-term, equitable, and meaningful collaborations with local scientific community. And as Caribbean biologists, we should start centering the Caribbean, promoting collections, staying in our collections. In order to move us forward in these conversations, we should conduct in-depth studies of the temporal and geopolitical patterns that have shaped natural history collections across the Caribbean region. We should foster an open dialogue aimed at developing more inclusive and equitable practices in the collection and curation of zoological specimens. We should encourage international researchers to build long-term, equitable, and meaningful collaborations with the local scientific communities, ensuring shared benefits and capacity building. As Caribbean biologists, we should prioritize centering the research needs of our region, amplifying local voices and leadership, and establishing a network that facilitates the mobilization of specimens and biodiversity data within the region. Even though repatriation of natural history specimens is still a rare event in the region, there is already a precedent for the Caribbean. The Jamaican giant gallywasp, a species now presumed extinct, two specimens were collected in the 1850s and housed at the University of Glasgow since 1888, have been repatriated to Jamaica, where there were not specimens housed locally. The repatriation comes after more than 170 years, setting an important precedent for the region. Whether you have thoughts, recommendations, or would like to collaborate in some of these efforts, I would love to hear from you, and please get in touch. Thank you so much.
Can you hear me, Patricia?
Yes. Yay. Awesome.
You've got everything. Okay. Thank you so much for your fantastic talk. There are questions. I have one if no one else has one.
There's a question here.
Oh, there is one? Okay.
Has a microphone.
Got my Patricia here.
Can you hear? Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I can. Yes.
Thanks very much for your talk. Really, really interesting. Just a question about the impact of that concentration of data on Caribbean biodiversity. You said it skews the field of biodiversity studies, but can you also see the impact on conservation practices in the Caribbean in terms of how that unevenness of access to data shapes particular actors in the Caribbean, who control and manage, ongoing conservation practices in the region as well? Thanks.
Did you hear that?
Did you hear the question, Patricia?
I did hear it as a comment, not as a question. Sorry about that, but I do want to say yes. You're totally right. This skewed of biodiversity data that is all most of it in the global north, leave us in the Caribbean very limited with the things that we can do with our comparative material in here. We don't have a lot of the times the resources to visit larger collections, which also limits our like research ability to publish, to understand what's better happening in our house in terms of conservation in general. So it's definitely limiting for all of us. And also the point of us being like islands, like also like ideological islands up to a point in which each island, each country does their own thing, and we don't really like communicate with each other that much. So it's definitely also a thing that we as a region should definitely focus on and work on.
Because I have a mic, so I'm privileged being able to have any questions. Do you have like an inter-island conference, or are you starting to build a network so that you have like a regular meetup with each other to kind of check in and help support each other?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So there are a few international conferences in the Caribbean. Actually, one of them is happening in Martinique pretty soon in June. But they are like kind of spotty. Like that same conference haven't happened since before the pandemic. There's another big conference happening in the Dominican Republic as well that invites the institutions, not just natural history collections, but just like scientific institutes and research institutions in general, and bring them to the Dominican Republic. But that also has been very spotty for the last 10 years or so. So there's an impetus and a wish to make that a reality and to be a constant thing. It's just it hasn't happened yet. That is like a constant every year come together for all Caribbean researchers and curators. But that would be like the best scenario.
Anybody else have any questions?
I have one. Hi. I maybe missed the date of when the Dominican Republic Museum was founded, but I'm wondering, is it an ongoing thing that new species are currently still being described and no types deposited? Yeah, I would say just to share your pain, it's still happening even in Ireland. We haven't been a colony for a while, but somebody did describe a new species this year and failed to lodge any types with our museum either. So yeah, that's the thing.
Yeah, I sympathize. Definitely happening up to this day. The museum was created in the 70s, early 70s. So since that moment, there has been an active scientific community in the country. But that hasn't even had like a huge impact on the number of paratypes. Even paratypes, like a lot of the times, are not left in our collections, which is like, but yeah, still happening. We obviously, when we are part of these collaborations with international researchers, we make a strong point of leaving at least the paratypes in our collection. But a lot of the time, sometimes we are not part, and then there's like no type specimens in the collection, which
Erica.
Yeah, it's kind of common about that. So I've been working in Dominica for the last 6 years, and we've been describing new species. And the second year we took a load back, and then the hurricane wiped out the building. They were all in. And so we've been trying to figure out how to do this, how to bring back specimens. So we had to kind of work on a little, what is the best way? So we've just been imaging all of the specimens and trying to give all the data back, because we don't want to do that. We don't want to just, do the old way. But we were like, oh God, they've all gone. And Dominique were like, just don't bring us the specimens. We have to figure out another way. But if there was more interconnectivity between the islands, And we could say, okay, can we put it in the Dominican Republic? Then it would be, at least there will be somewhere in the Caribbean that is close accessible too. So, you know, there has to be a way. We're still trying to work out the biodiversity. So
There's not many hurricanes in Ireland, though.
No.
Many hurricanes in Ireland.
no, I'm not playing that one. Or a hurricane. Although one of them was called Storm Erica. She did do a lot of that. I'm really sorry about that one. Yeah.
Thanks, Pat's got one.
Thanks for sharing.
Just wondering, has the Nagoya Protocol actually had any impact whatsoever on what's going on here? Because like, surely that's exactly what it's all about, is preventing exactly this sort of situation.
It has.
It has.
Yeah, massively.
Good.
Yeah.
What do you think, Patricia? Patricia? Do you think the Nagoya Protocol has had any impact?
Maybe I don't have a lot of experience with that. I have been talking about that with some of my colleagues in the Dominican Republic. We have been discussing that same thing, but I still cannot say, I still don't have a strong opinion about it, to be honest. So I really don't, but I would like to learn more first in order to be able to pick a side if that's a thing.
Anyone else?
Any other questions?
We're time, are we? We're over time.
How are the time?
We're over time. Thank you so much, Patricia.
Thank you for having me. Bye-bye.